Then we will review the literary elements for The Blue Tower by Evelyn Smith and also look at our 3 questions that were at the end of our story. And you can find this in our video description. So our story begins with our setting, which we are pretty much wondering, how are people allowed to live in this utopia where everyone is pretty much sitting around, laying in the sun, doing in their air-conditioned villas, living very comfortably? So we have our setting and some imagery here because we can see the people, we can feel the sunshine, and feel the air conditioning, I guess you could say. So we have Evelyn Smith building the setting and our imagery. And we also learn about our protagonist here, Ludovic, who enjoys poetry and basically indulging in this life of leisure. He is someone who seems to very much appreciate it. And then we go on to learn how this society is working like that. We have the Belphins, who are supposed to be the alien rulers of the planet. And they have created a world where supposedly the Belphins are serving humanity. So the humans feel as though they are really making out nicely here with these Belphins as their, you could call this an authoritarian rule because there is no voting. The Belphins just have complete control and they're ruling from this blue tower, hence the name of our story. And as we go on, we learn that the Belphins are supposed to be ruling with the power of love. And no one really seems to be questioning this, because then he says, "But who placed you in charge? And whence did you come? Fearing he might seem motivated by vulgar curiosity, I am doing research for an epic poem." And then we come from the stars. And we were placed in power by those who had the right, and the power through which rule is the power of love. Be happy. And it's odd. So vulgar would mean like something inappropriate or offensive. So the fact that curiosity is seen as something offensive, we could start to maybe assume that the Belphins maybe have some nefarious situation going on. So as we go, we then meet Ludovic's girlfriend of sorts, his love interest, this Flockhart family. And the Flockhart family would be a foil to Ludovic, because that would be an opposite. If Ludovic supports these Belphins unconditionally, the Flockharts oppose them loudly. And they're also painted to be, I guess you could say, kind of like this trashy family. They're saying you could tell malcontents, even if they did not voice their dissatisfaction by their faces. You could say they would be like the dissidents. They do not agree with the Belphins, and they think the world would be better. They also give us some information that could make us start to question the Belphins, because they have this theory that the Belphins are taking Earth's resources, selling them in outer space, and then making profit off the humans, which would sort of make sense to readers, because we as readers know nothing in this world is ever free. So it is a little odd to assume that the Belphins are doing all of this for good. So that is the purpose, we could say, of the Flockhart family. They're bringing a question to the Belphins' credibility and their benevolence. Benevolence means being good here, because he's going to say no more than any other loyal citizen. And he was a powerful creature who had not taken advantage of the numerous cosmetic techniques offered by the benevolent Belphins. So now we know that the Belphins are also basically encouraging the population to get plastic surgery, which is very odd. And Ludovic, he is quite offended by all of this. And he says it is sacrilege, meaning like blasphemy, usually something against religion. So that's how important the Belphins are. These people view them as religious beings, not only as their dictators, obviously. And we also learn that something can technically not be against the law, but it can definitely be frowned upon. So we see this idea that those who oppose the Belfins are kind of pushed and outcasts in society, which that's obviously not as bad as putting someone in prison, but it's definitely a little odd. And then he finds out that his lover, Corisande, is plotting something. And she's saying, I think there's a lot in what Ludovic said. Bless her, he thought emotionally. In the midst of her plotting, she had to spare a kind word. Corisande murmured, you are as noble and clever as beautiful. But they won't pay attention to me. How do you know? When we remained silent, I said, I suppose you already tried to warn them about us. So at one point, we have Ludovic finding out that Corisande and her family are plotting against the Belfins. But we know that Ludovic is in love with Corisande, so he is somewhat going along with this. But if we want to say his character, because one of our questions has to do with his character, he does claim that to Corisande that he is on their side. But then he goes and he starts to track down the Belfins to warn them that the Flockharts have this plan against them. And he's saying, this is where we could start to think the Belfins are a little odd, because as he's following them one after the other, they begin to outrun him, which is unusual because usually the Belfins are supposed to answer every human's question. So this tells us that maybe the Belfins are connected in some way, because if they all are running away from him, ones that he didn't even ask a question to, we could say they have some type of hive mind coming forth here. And so then we have poor Ludovic. This would be our climax, okay? Ludovic is going to approach the tower and try to get in. Now, he is doing this because he wants to warn the Belfins against the Flockharts. However, the Blue Tower is surrounded by the power of love. So if anyone hates the Belfins, they would basically kind of get blasted away, like the two Flockhart people did. But Ludovic, because he has love for the Belfins, their security does not work. And as he comes in, he learns the truth that there is just one Belfin in the tower in this water thing, and he was literally there to... It seems as though the Belfins might have been somewhat genuine in their ruling of Earth, because everything was going very well, but we still don't exactly know if they were taking resources and selling them. There could have been something up to them. But that was the last Belfin who had remained to be the caretaker of Earth. And then our irony happens in the end when he kills the Belfin, accidentally basically. He didn't exactly kill our Belfin on purpose. And he's saying, you fool, through your muddled-headed integrity, you have destroyed not only me, but Earth's future. I tried to make this planet a better place for humanity, and this is my reward. And then, as Corisande gave one rippling laugh he was to grow to hate so much, darling, you are my secret weapon all along, she beamed at her relatives, and it was then he noticed the faint lines of her forehead. So it appears that she had been misrepresenting herself, her age, and these relatives. They were just kind of like a gang of, I guess you could call them revolutionaries, because they wanted to revolt and do a coup on these Belfins. And even those people had lived apart in apparent content under the Belfins, accepting what they were given and seemingly enjoying their carefree lives, now declared themselves to have been suffering in silence and resentment all along. They hurled flowers and adulatory speeches at Ludovic and composed extremely flattering songs about him. And then this would be the irony at the end, because basically humanity unravels civilization. It goes back to tyranny, where there's famines, riots, plagues, and after the waves of mob hostility had coalesced into national groupings, wars. So things go back to not the best atmosphere. And in the end, Ludovic, he becomes a dictator in his 30th year as dictator of Earth, Lodovick poisoned Coruscant, had her poisoned, for by now he had a minister of assassination. So you could say that this story's irony is Lodovick starts as being this poet who had love for the Belphins. He had love for his girlfriend, even though she was definitely manipulating him. And you could interpret this by saying power can corrupt people. And because Lodovick definitely is considered a dynamic character. He started out a very good person, and in the end, he ends up being a 30-year dictator and murders his life partner, Coruscant. So that could be an example of our irony and how power can change someone. And also that we could say something about the Belphins, that sometimes there are people that are genuinely good. But then again, if the Belphins never gave anyone really a choice, we could also say, what is good? Is it important to give people a voice in their governance? Or should people just be told what to do for their own benefit? That could be ways you interpret this story. It can be interpreted in many ways. And our questions, and here you can go through your vocabulary and study the terms. And then there is a little vocabulary checklist. So you can make sure after you study your words, you could see if you can provide the definition in your own words, which can be difficult, providing a definition to a word you've just learned. So that can take some practice. Our first question, what does Lodovick's behavior when he discovers the Flockhearts are conspirators tell us about his character? Well, at first he was most definitely very upset here. Here would be the full text. We have, this obviously is our foreshadowing, that these were not her relatives in the first place. She had this whole plan to overthrow the Belphins, right? And as we see, when he finds out, he definitely does not get along very well with her family, but he hides it. And he basically, for his love for Coruscant, he doesn't really get into crazy arguments, but he does try to question them, saying if the status quo is good, why should I not accept it? So they have him asking about the freedom, saying they don't have freedom. You could say that his behavior after he finds out they're plotting shows we could sort of say he was a bit brainwashed by the Belphins. You could say his naive attitude, maybe even a little bit gullible, and definitely a lack of curiosity here. Because here when he finds, why shouldn't they, saying, it's excellent air. And the air goes back to really bad quality after the Belphins is taken down. And then we have, here he's getting irritated, right? His blind loyalty to these Belphins, he doesn't want to listen to them. And even when he finds out they might be a single entity, he doesn't care. So even if the Belphins were lying, so basically all the Belphins that are out in the community are like robot hive mind bodies. So this does not bother Lodovick at all. He has a extreme blind loyalty to them. And then when he overhears him climbing into the blue tower there, when he overhears that they have this plan, he promises that he won't tell, right? How can you stay with these subversives? Don't forget they're my family. I owe them dutiful respect, no matter how pig-headed. And then he vows that he's not going to tell on them. But he definitely does. So he goes from Belphin to Belphin, trying to explain what the Flockhearts are up to. And obviously, the Belphins don't care, because they know that their blue tower is protected by love. And when the Lockharts had tried to get inside before, they were stopped. So you could say that it shows his blind loyalty to the Belphins. You could also say it shows he's a liar. You could say he's gullible and naive because he will not even take Coruscant's opinions to heart. He just goes straight to the Belphins. So that's what you could say. His blind loyalty, being naive, any of those things. You could also say he was somewhat of a manipulator himself because he told her that he wasn't going to tell, and then he definitely did. And you could say love struck as well because he's saying these things to her, but he's doing the opposite. In our next question, we had the Belphins say they rule through the power of love. By the end of the story, what do we understand this phrase to mean? How does the author use irony to develop this idea throughout the text? Well, we know that the Belphins lied, and they were not exactly forthcoming with that they were not an entire group of them, that there was just one. So you could say it contrasts this idea of a utopia, endless leisure, golden bodies, creative pursuits with his poetry, with the hollowness beneath. The Belphins' love produces passive, unquestioning humans, while the rebels' love for freedom or power brings violence and new tyranny. The title's Blue Tower, symbol of benevolent authority, becomes a site of betrayal and collapse. So you could say ruling by the power of love could be ironic because there's always going to be people that wish to take power and not rule by love. So if one group is really ruling by love, and then there's another group that wants to rule by hate and control, the group ruling by love is always going to have to do some things that aren't the most loving. So if you want to retain power as a good person against a group that has malevolent or sinister plans, you always are going to have to maybe step out of the love and fight for what is good. Sometimes even those that are good need to fight. And in this case, we had Ludovich does not turn into a good leader. He gets the power and it corrupts him. So even though it seems as though, well, the Flockharts definitely didn't have the best intentions. Like, they kind of wanted to create chaos. They were anarchists in a way. So when they take power, they weren't planning on ruling with love. But Ludovic maybe could have. But he was so corrupted by the power that there was no way he could have done that. And then that brings us to our next central idea. You could have many central ideas here. You could say people, humankind will live, if humans are given everything they need, they may not question where it's coming from. That's definitely one, because you had the Belphins providing everything humanity needed, and very few were questioning. There was only a small number of these dissidents, like the Flockharts out there. So you could say that, and then you could say another essential idea could be how power can corrupt people. Once, Ludovich is a perfect example of this. You could use his characterization too. You could say, Ludovich's characterization proves the central idea that when given too much power, humans can be easily corrupted. We had Ludovich. He started out this very kind person. He was a poet, an intellectual, creative, loving towards Coruscant, and in the end he kills her, right? So, and he ruled for 30 years. So therefore we could say his characterization shows us that power most definitely corrupts. For our central idea, we have the central idea of the Blue Tower is that rulers who claim to govern, I would also say The Blue Tower by Evelyn Smith, is that rulers who claim to govern with love are actually using fake kindness to control people and stay in power. So this would be an authoritarian type government central idea. Smith uses irony to develop this idea. Irony shows the big difference between what the Belphins say and what is really true. One example is when the Belphins say they rule through the power of love and want everyone to be happy. But then we find out, in truth, their love is a deadly force field that kills anyone who tries to attack them. So that would be the Blue Tower. You could also use symbolism. You could either use irony, that the Belphins, they're saying they're ruling through love, but then if you go into their tower to say anything to them, you kind of get incinerated. Then you could also say that's a symbolism, that the Blue Tower symbolizes control through this idea of love, which isn't real, right? But anyways, another example is when Ludovich truly loves Coruscante and believes in the Belphins. His real love lets him enter the Blue Tower safely and helps kill the leader Belphin. Coruscante then says she used the power of love to destroy them and takes control herself. So that's most definitely irony. When you use the power of love to kill someone, that you would call that irony. It was ironic. And it's also ironic in the end, because we didn't, the fact that we didn't even know what the Belphins really were, and the fact that the power of love was what allowed Ludovich to get in and then inevitably kill the Belphin, that would be ironic. So she says she used the power of love to destroy that and take control of herself. These examples prove that love in the story is just a tool for power and not real care. Because we also had the Flockhart family saying they were going to do this for the human good. The humans were being enslaved, which they weren't doing anything, but they really didn't have their own free will. So this would be an example of a central idea paragraph where we named our central idea. And I notice I have it in the beginning, the first sentence, and then I sum it up in the final sentence. And then in between, I say what our literary element is going to be, this irony. And I gave 2 examples of the irony and how it developed our central idea. And remember that there could be many central ideas for a story. But as long as you're backing it up with a chosen literary element and some examples discussing that literary element, you should get a perfect score on any central idea paragraph assignment you could get. And this was our lesson for Evelyn Smith's science fiction story, The Blue Tower.